We are back with Zanny Minton-Beddoes and Richard Haas. Zanny, I wanted to ask you what the European perspective here is, because it does seem that Trump, in his frustration, is really lashing out at Europe. He has people like Marco Rubio talking about the end of NATO. And the Europeans must feel that this is, they're bearing the brunt of a war they were not consulted on, they were not, they believe is illegal. And yet, they will possibly suffer the consequences. What is Europe thinking about this, and what could they do?
Well, exactly as you say, Fareed. I mean, I think the Europeans are partly furious about a war that they consider to be illegal, misguided, and they certainly weren't consulted on. They're furious about being called cowards and other insults by the President of the United States when, remember, the only time NATO's Article 5 has been invoked was after 9/11, and thousands of Europeans and NATO forces served with distinction in Afghanistan. And they are also, however, worried about what this means for the European economy, which is really quite considerable. Europe is a big net importer, relies on fossil fuels from the Gulf. They see the impact on their economy. And on top of that, now they have the President of the United States and the Secretary of State basically saying, NATO's finished. And I think they're really worried about that. And, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is going to Washington this week to make a speech and to talk to President Trump. But I think there's a growing realization in Europe, even amongst those European countries that have always seen the glass half full and have always hoped that they can maintain some kind of a special relationship with the United States, that this time something really might be different. And Radek Sikorski, the foreign minister of Poland, put it, he said, we cannot pretend that the United States president isn't saying what he is saying. And I think on top of everything that's happened in the last year, from the tariffs to the earlier pushing to get the Europeans to spend more money on defense, which frankly was a good idea, then to the verbal attacks on Greenland, now this, I think there's a recognition in Europe that, maybe this is a divorce.
Richard, that could also mean an extraordinary cost to the United States. One of the things people don't think about is Europe buys a huge amount of American defense equipment. In fact, you could even almost say the deal is the United States has offered to protect Europe, and Europe in return buys American kit. I think I saw the number I saw was $800 billion of European defense spending over the next, 5 or 6 years. Is now going to be diverted almost entirely to non-American producers. All of this seems to suggest, the breaking down of the West as a strategic alliance, as a military alliance, as a political alliance.
Look, Fareed, I wish I could disagree with both of you, but I can't. We are dismantling the foundations of what has provided peace and stability for the best part of the last 8 decades. And we are dismantling it. NATO is a shell of its former self. I can't believe there are many Europeans left who believe that if Russia were to do something in parts of Europe, the United States could be counted upon to come to their defense. The problem is Europe is not ready to become self-sufficient. So this has created a real opening for Russia, which is already, as you pointed out, the principal beneficiary of this war. I think it's also created opportunities for China. So strategically, we've, if you will, undermined a set of policies in an era that works so much to the American advantage. What we haven't done is put in place anything else, much less anything better. So we've created a moment in history, shall we say, that if you're not uneasy, if you're not worried, you're really not paying attention.